Okay, Psalm 46. So if you're flipping through your Bibles, flip to Psalm 46. If you have it out already, now is the time to look at it. Psalm 46. God is our refuge and stronghold, a help in trouble, very near. Okay, so it's a it's a wonderful, interesting opening. Um, you've got some wordplay going on, right? God is our stronghold, Oz, a help, Ezrat, um, Bitsarot. I think there's lots of sound stuff going on. Um, you've got stuff going on like the middle of this line is refuge, stronghold, help, and trouble, uh, all of which I think go together. Whereas the outside is God is for us and sort of very near, or like the actual near isn't exactly what it says. It says like very findable, like like the idea being that like accessible, right? When we're in trouble, we can count on this guy. Um, and we might stop a second and think, okay, a psalm that starts like this: God is our refuge and stronghold in a help in a time of trouble. It sounds like a communal lament, right? It's us, our, we, and it suggests that there's trouble, like something is the matter, and what we're lucky because we have a God that we can count on. So I want to keep that in mind as we move through. I'm going to try and move through this a tiny bit faster than the last one. Therefore, we are not afraid though the earth reels, though mountains topple into the sea. Its waters, that's the sea's waters, rage and foam. In its swell, mountains quake. So it's something of a surprising turn. It sounded like the people were in trouble. Now it actually sounds, since we just read Psalm 29, we might be like, oh, this kind of just sounds like storm imagery again, right? Mountains toppling into the sea, waters raging, foaming, mountains quaking. That all feels similar, similar to the kind of nature convulsion of nature stuff that we saw in the previous psalm. So maybe we've got a similar situation, right? It's the people in the temple looking out and saying, "Boy, I'm glad I'm not out in that storm." I realize this is like a particularly apropos or maybe entirely inapt stuff to be reading, given what's going on in Florida right now. But looking out and being like, "I'm glad we're not in that." Our God thankfully protects us from stuff like this. Um, what else is going on here? I mean, there's a ton of like internal to the verse here. There's lots of wordplay. Nira, Hamir, Harim, Yahemu, Yahmeru. Like there's all kinds of wordplay going on. This is all really classic. You can find this imagery all over the place. Mountains quaking, and we'll see mountains melting, and the earth melting, and mountains toppling, and this is all standard storm kind of language. Um, so maybe it turned out this wasn't a communal lament. Maybe this was a hymn. Um, uh, but then I'm not sure, right? Because suddenly we get this somewhat strange line. There is a river, I guess, whose streams gladden the city of God. Okay, it's about Jerusalem, the holy dwelling place of the Most High. Definitely Jerusalem, definitely the temple. God is in its midst. Remember, they understand God to like actually physically dwell in the temple. It will not be toppled. Now, it might, I should say here, like toppled. That's the same word we had in the last line, right? Where the earth reels and the mountains topple. But this mountain, right, Mount Zion, the mountain of the dwelling place of God, right, this mountain won't topple, right? Why? Because God is in its midst. And that makes me think of line one, where God was like very near, very accessible, very findable. Um, and again, I hear the storm imagery and I see it, and I also can't help but feel like God will come to its aid by daybreak sort of also sounds like something really bad is happening out there. Like there are attackers. Um, like this is a poem that I think at least is playing with this storm language as, shattering and breaking. It's got a militaristic sense to it, the storm language. It's causing nature to convulse. Um, and here I think it's almost taking up the storm imagery to apply it to potentially a military situation. And if I were being incredibly like picky about this, and if somebody forced me, and I hope nobody ever would, I might suggest that in fact this psalm even like feels like it could come from not just a military threat, but like specifically the Assyrian military threat in the reign of Hezekiah. Why do I say something as crazy like that? Well, um, if you've ever been to Jerusalem, one of the cool tourist attractions is this thing called Hezekiah's Tunnel in Jerusalem, which is truly a tunnel from inside the old city, underneath its walls and out to the spring. That's a tunnel that's described in the Bible as the mechanism by which Hezekiah, feeling that like while the Assyrians were besieging Jerusalem, was like, in order to make sure that we still have fresh water, we're going to build this tunnel underneath. Now, again, maybe I'm overreading, but there's a river whose streams gladden the city of God, the holy dwelling place of the Most High. And maybe because of that stream exists, it won't be toppled. It feels almost like this is sort of like referring to it, but I might be saying too much. Maybe that's just me as I said, overreading. But again, it does feel like whereas the previous psalm was really about a storm, this one maybe not about a storm, but is using storm language to talk about an actual military enemy. Here's where I think it kind of gives it away in verses 7 through 8. Again, I got more toppling, right? But now it's not nature, right? It's nations rage, right? Nations like they're raging there. That's one of the things that the waters did. Kingdoms topple. That's the word that like the mountains topple, but not this mountain, right? He raises his voice and the earth dissolves. That's thunder and lightning, right? So that's his voice, his thunder, and the earth's dissolving. That's probably like what it looks like. Again, if you've ever been in Israel during a rainstorm, which means you were there in the winter, right? Like it's dry, it's dry, it's dry, and then it rains, and it's like it feels like the earth is melting, right? If the water comes down from the mountains, it's a striking visual thing. Um, so I've got the storm imagery of like the thunder and the earth dissolving, but now I'm pretty sure that this isn't really about a storm anymore. This is about God protecting Jerusalem in the face of a military threat. And that's enforced by the name that's given to God here, the Lord of hosts, Adonai Tsevaot, right? Hosts, if you weren't aware in this like relatively common name for God, hosts is military hosts, right? God, that's the word for armies, right? So this military deity is with us. Our haven, right? And haven is like calls back not word for word, but to the opening line, right? God is our refuge and our strength, right? Now our haven is the God of Jacob. So you've got like this at the beginning of the line, right? God is our refuge and our strength. And at the end here, at least the end of what we've read, our haven, right, with us, right? There's this us that is the beginning and at the end that's around for framing all this natural imagery. Where is the us? Surely it is. They are also in Jerusalem, probably in the temple, in this haven, right? This unshakable, undefeatable mountain of God's dwelling. So again, we're combining what feels like like a lament, like a save us with a hymn to God's power that combined, I think, remember last time or two times ago I said, right, like we shouldn't think of genre as like every poem has to be exactly one genre. It's the artistry is really in playing with the genre. And here's such a wonderful example. It's like it's the hymn storm god language, it's the communal lament save us language combined to give a sense of like, yeah, it may be bad out there, but God is actually in control. And our God it will protect us. And that comes even more to the fore when we move on into the second part of the psalm. Um, in verse 9, we get really a pretty abrupt shift in tone. No longer are we talking about like God is our refuge, God is our strength, God is our haven, God will save us. Suddenly now it's like it's as if the storm has passed. Right. Now that's a shift. We talked about that a few weeks ago, in these Psalms of individual lament, where they're like, God, please save me. And then it says something like, and I know that God has heard my plea and everything is now okay. Same thing here. Communal lament, God will rescue us, to now it's definitely done. Right. Come see the completed deeds of God. Um, right. In other words, there's a narrative here. There's a story that's being told. And there's an expansion. It's not just God protecting Jerusalem. He has wrought desolation on the whole earth. And that's a wonderful line. That second line is wonderful to say out loud. Asher sam shamot ba'aretz, right? Like the first three words all sort of blend together before we get to on the earth. Um, Again, like the notion is, oh boy, you see all this stuff, this terrible thing is happening outside us, like this threat, this external threat. But not only is God protecting us here in Jerusalem, here, like in his temple, but actually all that destruction you see out there isn't a foreign enemy coming to attack us. This is our God is the one actually doing that. Right. So again, it's very much like Psalm 29, which was entirely, I think, sort of natural storm imagery, where they're like, oh, it's terrible out there, but it's cool. We're safe in here. Our God is the one doing it. The same thing is true here, even when it's military. Um, and again, I'm pretty sure it's military when I get here. He puts a stop to to wars throughout the earth. Okay, that's sort of utopian, fine. But we're definitely not talking about Israel or Jerusalem anymore. Now it's God as like worldwide bringer of peace, although we'll admit that he's bringing the peace through violence. Um, now we get the language that, if you remember from Psalm 29, is language that we know from like the storm god stuff, right? He breaks, right? If you remember, he broke the cedars of Lebanon, right? He snaps, right? He shatters the spear. He burns in flame, right? So like this is all totally normal storm god imagery, except that it's not talking about trees and nature and whatever. It's talking about tools of war. He's breaking the bow and the spear and the wagon. Um, so it's like it's again. I think I was just talking to one of my doctoral students today about how much I love. I was thinking about it because of this class. How much I love this psalm, and familiar even perhaps to you, having read Psalm 29 just now. It's this familiar language of storm, but it is like it turns out, as you read, it's not about that at all. It's just using that language to get across this hymnic notion of a God who is in control of things that are terrifying. Um, and then the ending, like completely wild, right? We've had, we anyway, out of nowhere, we get this like the voicing of God in the first person. Stop. Like leave off and know that I am God. Who is God talking to there? Um, it would certainly, I would think, not be the speaker of the psalm, not the people who are praising God here, but it's as if the psalmist is giving voice to God, who is telling presumably the enemy to just give up, right? Give up. Realize that I am God. I dominate in the JPS translation. True, literally, I am like elevated above the nations. I am high above the earth. That's what God says. That's God's language. Uh, this notion of like suddenly a really like a transnational universal deity, right? A deity who's really in control of all the things. You think you're attacking, stop, right? I'm bigger than your national concerns. I'm bigger than the whole earth. Um, and then, of course, it ends with a repetition of what we had in line 8. The Lord of hosts is with us. Our haven is the God of Jacob. That repetition really like it sets off these last 3 lines as being something different, right? If the poem had ended in verse 8 with these last lines as we had them before, again, it would feel very much like a, oh, we're really in trouble, right? Like, but we trust that God will save us. And then it's like maybe it's after the fact, maybe it's like a real expression of hope. But anyway, but these lines that then come after that are again framed by that same concluding line. It's like now the Lord of hosts is with us, our haven is God of Jacob reads very differently after we've gotten God say, everybody stop, I've got this thing. Um, it's anyway, I think it's I went through it faster, and there's as always infinitely more to say about these. But I really loved the progression from Psalm 29 to Psalm 46 because I think that you can really see how like a very traditional hymn, how that idea and language can be taken up in a completely different way that like still resonates, right? Like everyone will hear the storm god stuff, but it's very clearly, in fact, a communal lament or a communal psalm about military threat.